Today we will discuss one of the most intriguing episodes in history. Who killed Muhammad, the King of Islam? It may seem like a straightforward question, but in reality it carries layers of mystery, belief, and even silent resistance. What if I told you that it was not just an ordinary death, but an event surrounded by symbolism and interpretations that have spanned centuries? Imagine a woman in a devastated world who dared to challenge a figure considered divine by many. Her name was Zainab bint Harith, and her act of resistance was not only bold, but carefully calculated. What makes this story even more fascinating is that this narrative is not just about Zainab or Muhammad. It is about the limits of human nature and the confrontation with the divine. It explores how suffering, choices, and even a person's final words can carry meanings that unfold across generations. Get ready, because we are about to embark on a journey of questioning and discovery. But first, do you want to discover more about the mysteries and curiosities of the Bible? Subscribe to our channel now and activate the bell so you don't miss any content. Few moments in history teach us as much about the human spirit as events that occur during times of conflict. Imagine the city of Khaybar, a jewel of culture and resistance in the Arabian Peninsula. The Jewish community that lived there not only thrived, but also fiercely defended its beliefs and traditions. However, the arrival of Muhammad and his followers brought a complete upheaval, turning these people's homeland into a battlefield. After a series of intense battles, the city was taken. The dust of conquest brought not only victory, but also pain. The men were executed, and the survivors were subjected to a new reality of submission and loss. In this desolate scenario, Zainab bint Harith emerged, a woman whose strength and cunning transcended the expected role of her time. Having lost her loved ones, Zainab did not allow herself to be swallowed by grief. Instead, she channeled her pain into a plan that would challenge the very foundations of prophecy. Zainab was more than a victim of war. She was a strategist in her own right. Every move she made seemed to be filled with purpose. Aware of Muhammad's claims of being sent by God, she found a way to test this assertion in a nearly poetic manner. To her, it was simple. Either Muhammad was under divine protection, or he was as mortal as any other man. This scenario not only reveals the horrors of war, but also the echoes of resistance that arise from the ruins. Zainab's story stands out for her courage amid chaos. Her decision to act rather than submit to silence paved the way for one of the most controversial narratives in Islamic history. However, her bold act was not an endpoint, but the beginning of an event that would unfold with surprising consequences. Imagine the tension of a banquet where every movement, every word, carries a layer of hidden meaning. It is in this setting that Zainab bint Harith executes her daring plan. Preparing a poisoned lamb was not just an act of resistance, it was a test worthy of Muhammad's words. To her, the banquet was more than a meal. It was a stage where the truth or the fall of a prophet would be revealed. The guests settled in, and the atmosphere was one of apparent tranquility. Muhammad, surrounded by his companions, sat before the dish prepared with intentions few could have imagined. Zainab, however, remained firm, watching intently. At the first bite, something triggered Muhammad's perception, a strange taste, an almost instinctive warning. He stopped eating, but not everyone reacted as quickly. Bishr, one of his followers, paid with his life. When confronted, Zainab did not hesitate to reveal her reasoning. Her words were direct. If Muhammad was truly a prophet, he would be protected by God. If he was not, the poison would fulfill its purpose. This statement was not just an admission, but a challenge that echoed more than simple doubt. It was as if she were telling the world, "Let's see how far his divine protection goes." This act, both calculated and risky, placed Muhammad in a delicate position. He not only had to deal with the death of a companion, but also with the pressure of responding to Zainab's provocation. The banquet, which had begun as a moment of victory, turned into a field of questions and uncertainties. The story of Muhammad after the banquet in Khaybar leads us into a realm of intense reflections. Although he avoided the fatal effects of the poison by stopping eating quickly, the consequences of Zainab's act reverberated throughout his life in a slow and painful manner. It was as if the poison had become a shadow, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Islamic sources report that Muhammad began experiencing pains that intensified over time. It was not just discomfort, but a persistent presence that followed him. He frequently mentioned the sensation that his aorta was being severed, an image so vivid that it transcended physical pain and became almost metaphorical. This expression, repeated numerous times, raises a question that many still try to decipher today. What is most intriguing is how this phrase resonates with a specific verse in the Quran, which states that if a false prophet attributed words to God, he would cut off his aorta. For critics and scholars, this coincidence appears as a theological enigma. Was it a divine warning or merely an interpretation of human events? Meanwhile, Muhammad sought ways to alleviate his suffering. He resorted to traditional cures and prayers, both his own and those of his followers. Even the angel Gabriel was invoked at critical moments, but the shadow of the poison remained. There are moments in life when even the most revered figures face divine silence. For Muhammad, this reality presented itself strikingly, bringing to light reflections on the connection between faith and God's will. One of the most moving episodes was the illness and death of Ibrahim, Muhammad's son. Seeing his son's frailty, Muhammad prayed intensely, pleading for God to preserve the child's life. But despite his fervent supplications, Ibrahim did not survive. This event shook not only a father's heart, but also some of his followers' perceptions of his prophetic mission. Among the questions raised, one stood out, posed by one of his wives, Al-Shamba, who openly wondered if he was truly a prophet, saying, "If you were a true prophet, your loved one would not have died." This statement not only hurt Muhammad, but also brought forth a theological dilemma. To what extent is prayer a reflection of divine intervention? This event, combined with the prolonged pain caused by the poison, increased doubts among some, creating a contrast with the accounts of biblical prophets whose prayers often resulted in visible miracles. In the sacred texts, we see figures like Elijah, who brought a widow's son back to life. These parallels raise difficult questions. If other prophets were capable of such grand divine interventions, why did Muhammad not receive the same? These moments of divine silence pave the way for a broader discussion about the fruits of a prophet and how their mission is perceived in the light of sacred scriptures. After all, the true test of a prophet is not only in their words, but in the actions that reflect their relationship with the divine. The consequences of the poison and Muhammad's repeated phrase, "I feel like my aorta is being severed," became central to the theological discussions that followed. For some, this suffering was merely a consequence of his mortal condition, but for others, there was an unsettling parallel with the Quran. This type of coincidence sparks reflections that go beyond the event itself. A prophet's mission is often tested by suffering, and their authenticity is frequently evaluated under the weight of adversity. In Muhammad's case, the echo of his own words amid his pain raised questions about the limits of divine protection. Moreover, Zainab's narrative and her act of resistance challenged the boundaries between human courage and divine intervention. Zainab's frankness, in stating that she wanted to verify whether Muhammad was protected by God, transformed an act of vengeance into a spiritual reflection. Her direct logic and challenge left a mark that resonated in profound theological discussions about the role of a prophet and his connection to the supernatural. Faith, though firm for many, naturally faces disruptions when confronted with legitimate doubts. The difference between a prophet inspired by God and a charismatic leader is often reflected in their fruits, as the Bible itself teaches by stating, "By their fruits you will know them." Looking at these aspects, we are led to question the depth of the relationship between a prophet's actions and God's will. However, one crucial point remains. How do these stories connect with biblical traditions in the view of the fruits of a true prophet? When we examine Muhammad's life in the light of biblical scriptures, inevitable comparisons arise, highlighting both the similarities and differences in the perception of a prophet. Zainab's story, with her fearless resistance and the lasting impact of the poison, provoke a deeper analysis of the fruits of his mission. The Bible, especially in passages such as Matthew 7:15-20, emphasizes that a true prophet is known by their fruits. Good fruits come from good trees. Another point that challenges understanding is Muhammad's repeated statement about his aorta and its coincidence with the Quranic verse that mentions the punishment for false prophets. For his critics, this is seen as a direct reflection of his authenticity. For his defenders, however, it is a metaphorical expression of his suffering, an example of how even those chosen by God are not exempt from intense trials. These polarized interpretations show how prophetic stories are continually shaped by those who tell them. This final reflection on biblical comparisons in the role of a prophet leaves us with a greater question. To what extent does suffering shape the legitimacy of a spiritual leader? And like any great story, this one does not end with simple answers, but with an open door for continuous interpretation and debate. The story of Zainab and the poisoning of Muhammad is not merely a tale of resistance or an isolated episode in the historical narrative of Islam. It is an invitation to reflect on human complexities, tests of faith, and the echoes of doubt that transcend eras. Muhammad's prolonged suffering, his unanswered prayers, and his final words opened a chasm of interpretations. For some, each pain was evidence of his humanity. For others, a gap in his connection with the divine. The parallels with biblical prophets reinforce this search for authenticity. While Elijah and Elisha were visible instruments of divine power, Muhammad's experiences create a dichotomy between miracle and fragility. But perhaps this comparison serves as a reminder that faith in its essence always walks the line between certainty and mystery, between the tangible and the unexplainable. When we look at Zainab and her boldness, we see the portrait of someone who refused to accept an imposed destiny without a final act of defiance. Her story is not just a footnote, but a chapter that still resonates today, challenging us to think about leadership, spirituality, and the thin lines that connect them.